host, Paul Geoghegan, and this time we're going to be talking about the inspiration behind my company Envisiontech and this podcast itself. As I'm sure you're aware, if this isn't your first episode of the podcast, I'm actually blind, right? And that is at least partially why I started my own company. And I suppose it was honestly one of the bigger motivations, just because of my experience with the tech industry in general. So my inspiration here was essentially to start a company that I don't want to say could do things better, because I mean, obviously there are things that I'm not going to do as well as certain others or whatever. You know, I'm not as knowledgeable as, for example, in AI, as somebody who founds an AI company, and that's fine. But somebody who would kind of take a slightly different approach to a lot of other software companies, where their goal is just to make, I don't want to say cheap software, but, software that is as cheap as possible, as fast as possible, for as many people as possible. And there are companies out there who don't do that, but a lot of those companies don't really focus on accessibility. Or even if they do, it's more so from a second kind of thought. They're like, oh yeah, well, this is a legal requirement, so we should probably get this done. So I wanted to do something different, because there are so many examples of different apps or websites that you will go to that aren't accessible. Even just now, right? Literally right before this podcast, was trying to sign into something on our Android TV, and the Google pop-up showed up to sign in, and there's a continue or a cancel button. And I had TalkBack on, which is the screen reader on Android. And it actually didn't work with this pop-up that showed up. And keep in mind, this is made by Google, the people who make Android and who make TalkBack. And even they don't make things accessible sometimes. And there's plenty of examples of Google doing that with their products, which is a little bit silly. But it's those everyday things that I kind of had to, I don't want to say put up with, but essentially put up with, and that millions of other people have to put up with, that I had kind of had enough of. There are a couple of things that sort of really pushed me to actually go ahead and start my own company, because it's something I have wanted to do for quite a long time. But it's something that I wasn't too sure about, and even if I was going to do it, it probably would have been in quite a few years. But number one was my wife, Melissa, who was always telling me that I should start my own company and that she thinks I would do great. And that was honestly a really big sort of push that I needed. But one of the other ones was I had started working at a company, and I essentially said to myself, okay, some of the software that they use here isn't accessible. And I get that, right? And there's nothing they can do about it, because it wasn't even software that they made, right? It was, software made by really big companies like Microsoft, for example. So nothing that the company that I was working at really could do about it, except maybe give out to Microsoft. But if Microsoft does ever fix it, it'll probably be quite a while, and let's be honest, they probably won't. And even if they do, it might break tomorrow, and I can't say, oh, well, actually, I know everybody in this organization is using this piece of software, I'm going to use a different one. Obviously, that wouldn't work. So that was, I feel like, the final push that I needed, where I kind of said, okay, well, I can keep doing this and be annoyed every day, or I can start my own company, use whatever software I want. If I need to change it, I can, and make better software. And I think that's what really kind of gave me out of that final push to say, okay, yeah, I think it actually is now time for me to do my own thing, because otherwise, honestly, it would have just been way worse. My day-to-day life would have been way more stressful. I would have been way more annoyed just in work, and obviously that probably would have then affected me outside of work. And now I get to do something that I love, right? Which I would have gotten to do software engineering anyway, but now I get to do essentially whatever project I want. And yeah, I do obviously do work for clients, but I decide whether or not I accept a client, what kind of clients I want. And if I don't want to work on a project, I can say, no, actually, sorry, we're not gonna, do that project. It's not a good fit or whatever. And that's not a problem, you know? I said if I run into a piece of software that's not accessible, or let's say Visual Studio Code, right, which is what I use to write code in, um, if that tomorrow gets an update and it's no longer accessible and I can't use it, well, that's fine. I can switch to something else. I think another big inspiration was definitely being able to help people. As part of my work with Envisionly, I've been working with clients, right? So let's say they want a website. Well, maybe I even gone to their current website and it's not accessible. And they don't know, because they probably hired somebody else to build it, and that person either didn't know about accessibility or didn't really feel like bothering to, make the website accessible, whatever it might be. But when I go to people and let them know, like, hey, I'm actually blind, I can't use your website, usually they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Um, and they're not happy about their website not being accessible. So that's another thing is people just aren't aware. So if you're hiring a software company, you're going to assume that they're going to do the best job that they can, that they're going to do it all properly, they're going to make everything work nicely, etc. And even if you are using a tool like, let's say, Squarespace or Wix or WordPress, there is absolutely no guarantee that your website will be accessible, right? Absolutely none. And there are so many examples of websites that I've gone to that have been built with, a tool, well, one of those tools or a tool like those, and it isn't accessible, or maybe you're using something in a slightly different way than it was intended, because, usually you're not a web design expert, if you're just making your own website for your own small company. And that's fine, it's not a problem. And then it ends up not being accessible, So it's a really big problem when essentially all these businesses are having these things happen without even realizing. And if you're using something like Wix or whatever, and you're not super technical, maybe you haven't looked at your scores for your website. So you can go to certain websites and they will tell you essentially how good your website is. They will give you scores in terms of the performance of your website, the accessibility of your website, the best practices of your website, the SEO or search engine optimization of your website, etc. They'll tell you how fast your homepage loads. They'll tell you about your images, whether they're too big or too small or whatever it is, and it'll give you loads of recommendations. So that's again another reason why I wanted to start Envisioning, is to help people. Number one, other blind people, and secondly, also just other people, even other small business owners who I feel like might be getting ripped off by their current software company, who are charging them too much for a website or for hosting or whatever. And I think that we could probably do it for a lot less. Then I'm gonna want to do that. I'm gonna want to help them out. I'm gonna want to say, okay, yeah, well, actually, we could probably improve your website and we could probably also save you money in the process. I mean, that just works for everybody, and it's just a good thing. Now, don't get me wrong, it has been a pretty great experience, and in general, I can decide what I want to use and I can ensure that it's accessible. But that does not mean that I have not encountered accessibility problems while setting up my own business and while running my own business. For example, the website here for the taxation sort of part of the government, which is called revenue here, or if you're in the US, it might be called the IRS. Oh, well, it is called the IRS, and I don't know what it's called in any other countries, but I assume you know what I'm talking about, right? It's where you go if you want to file your taxes. That is not very accessible. The website here where you have to go to actually register a company, not very accessible, etc., etc., etc. There are so many examples of even government-run websites that aren't accessible, which would stop somebody like me from starting their own business or from filing their own taxes, which will either cost you a lot of extra money, or it will just stop you from doing it entirely, which is, in my opinion, ridiculous. And there have been many hurdles like that. Plenty of tools that I've wanted to use, and I've gone to their website. Turns out it's not accessible. Turns out none of the buttons are labeled. Whatever it might be. I said even Google products. that just don't work. Like the Google Ads website is surprisingly inaccessible. There are a surprising amount of problems on there that I can't fix by myself, and I need somebody else to help me use the website, which is ridiculous. Like how can a company like Google or something like the Irish government have something that isn't accessible? And I said those are just sort of some of the accessibility problems that I've encountered, right? Like just in starting the company. I said like day to day I'll find tools that I want to use and I'm just like, well, actually I can't use this, so I'm going to have to find something else. And it again kind of feeds back into my want to keep going though. So let's say I'm using Gmail, right, on the web. Um and I find something that's not accessible. I'm like, wow, I mean, I feel like maybe this could be improved. I'm going to email Google. I'm going to write a LinkedIn post. I'm going to make my own. I'm going to make my own tool, which I'm actually, as I've made an episode about, I'm actually kind of in the process of doing that for a learning platform for programming, because I found that a lot of them either aren't very accessible, or even if they are accessible, there are parts of them that aren't, or there are at least problems with them. Whether it be with the specific content, they'll use a lot of screenshots, or whatever it might be, So even those specific challenges that I do encounter honestly do motivate me to keep going with my business and to keep sort of improving on things. Currently, the quote unquote team here at Envisiontly is just me and my wife currently, right? And I've been thinking about maybe hiring somebody. Thankfully, things have been going pretty well, and we're getting to a point where maybe I could do that. But it's a little bit of a struggle, right? Because not only do I need to find, for example, a software engineer, I need to find somebody who cares about the same things that I do. And they don't have to agree with me on everything, but they need to understand accessibility, or at least want to learn about it. And, I've been approached by many different companies now about outsourcing development or, outsourcing other services. And I'm like, yeah, I could probably save some money as opposed to hiring a developer myself. But will they care about accessibility? Probably not. And even if they do, I said it's more about compliance than actual care, you know? And I said that's really important to me because I don't want to just be like, oh yeah, well, this website is now compliant with this legal regulation. I want it to be, oh, actually, yeah, we're compliant with this regulation, but this could probably be better. So I want to fix it. I want to improve it. And obviously, I get that not everybody is going to want to do exactly the same things as me, and that's fine. But that's kind of part of the challenge of assembling a team because I want people who care, essentially. Even, if it's not about accessibility, which, they would kind of need to care about accessibility, but even about other small business owners or about whatever it might be. Like, I want somebody who isn't just good at coding because, that's great and all, and I'm sure I could find plenty of people who are good at coding. But I want somebody who is, I suppose, actually interested in things, interested in, their job, interested in making, an improvement to whatever it is. Even if they join the team and they say, oh, well, actually, I've been using this app now for however many years, and honestly, it has a lot of problems. I'd really love to fix it. I tried to, use it with like a screen or whatever. It doesn't work. Would we be able to maybe, take that on as a project and do that and make that in-house? Like I want essentially people like that who really care. Because if you don't know about accessibility, that's fine. But you best believe that if I sort of give somebody the opportunity to understand or to learn and they don't take it, then that's not really something that I like. I don't really want that person working here. Like I said, somebody who cares. Even as part of the interview process, me and my wife actually talked about this the other day, right? A lot of people will have CVs and they are PDFs. And I told her that if somebody sends me an inaccessible PDF, I probably wouldn't consider them. And I wouldn't just, not mention it or anything like that. on the application form, I'll have information about it. I might even, give them some links to some tools to check if their PDFs are accessible. I'll give them every opportunity that they need, essentially, to make sure that they can make the PDF accessible or understand, how to do it. And if they don't want to take the time to do that, then I probably don't want a person like that working here at Envisiontly. Otherwise, I don't really care about who will be on the team or, what their interests are, or honestly, even how good they are at coding. Because, yeah, is it great to be able to hire a, senior software engineer who already knows what they're doing? Yes. But the thing is, that's a learned skill, at least generally, right? You can learn how to program. You can learn to get better at programming. You can learn to be a software architect. You can learn to deploy websites or to manage a database. But you can't really learn to care, at least not in the same way. So I feel like that's what's really valuable to me and what I would really like sort of the company culture to be. It's not about, oh, I'm the best software engineer in the world. It's about, oh yeah, I'm a software engineer and I actually really care about making things accessible, or I care about making good things. Like I care about actually making a good product or a good website, not just cheap, inexpensive stuff that we can sell for a high margin. I think that although my disability can be a bit of a disadvantage sometimes when it comes to other business owners and being able to maybe do things in the same way, I said, for example, even using Revenue, right, the Revenue website for filing your taxes, right? It's not super accessible, so it's kind of hard for me to use, so it'd probably take me longer than it would take somebody else, which obviously isn't ideal. But I feel like it's also really helped give me a very unique perspective. Number one, I think just my problem solving is better than most because I'm almost always having to solve a problem. Whether it's, okay, I can't click this button, is there anything that I can do? Or even if I'm outside and I'm like, okay, well, actually, I thought that I already should have, made it to my turn. So what should I do from here to figure out where I am? I'm pretty much always encountering a problem. And even just focusing on details, right? That is something that I really care about. I care about the little details in things. I said even in a website, for example, I really care about those. I don't like doing things sort of halfway. And it does honestly sometimes mean that things take a bit longer, or that maybe it can't be done the original way that I wanted because actually that isn't going to work for this reason. So we have to come up with a new solution. But it in general means that we end up with a better result. So instead of having something that's on time and it works well, people are happy with it, that's all good. We have something that maybe took a little bit longer, but it is perfect. Or at least, as close to perfect as it can be. And people don't just like it and they're not just happy with it. They are, it is unbelievably good. It is as good as they could have imagined, essentially. And I feel like that really does sort of benefit me. And I feel like it also opens up more opportunities. Like I have the opportunity to say, oh, hey, I'm Paul. I was looking at your website. I was trying to use it, or I was trying to use your tool. Actually, it's not super accessible. Here's some advice on how to fix it. Even with Web Awesome, right, which is a new project that essentially will be available, I think, next June, I think it is, or April. And it is essentially a way for developers to make websites easier and better, right? So if you want to add, let's say, an image carousel. So if you're not familiar with what that is, it's essentially an image slideshow, but it has, well, sometimes they have controls and stuff at the bottom to let you change what the current image is. They have next or previous buttons. So instead of having to build one of those yourself or find one online as an example, WebAwesome will just have that built in, so you can just use that one, right? So I've been working a fair bit on that project, not working in an official capacity, but I have been reporting accessibility problems with it because Envisionly backed that project. It was available on Kickstarter. So I have early access to it at the minute. So I have a unique opportunity to say, okay, this actually isn't accessible, or there's a problem with this, or maybe this could be improved. And sometimes, it's actually not a fixable problem. They're like, oh, well, actually, this is a problem with the browser or with, the screen reader or whatever it might be. That's not something that we can actually fix. And, me and the person that I would be talking to at WebAwesome will go off and we might actually, open a bug or open an issue with the screen reader or with the browser. And as I said, that kind of opens a unique sort of opportunity for me as a business owner to get involved in more things and to get involved in them in a bit of a different way, I feel like, as well. I mean, as I mentioned, sometimes I do encounter quite a few problems, whether it be with the revenue website or with a tool that I want to use or whatever it might be. And honestly, sometimes it can be a bit hard to stay motivated and to want to keep going and to not just say, you know what, forget this. I'm just going to give up, go get, a regular job and make my life a bit simpler. But I said it's kind of about wanting things to be better, and that's what helps me stay motivated. Because, maybe I'll email, however many people, and they don't really care about things being accessible or whatever. But then maybe I'll get a comment on a LinkedIn post, or I'll get a reply to an email, or I'll get, somebody reach out and mention something, And I suppose that kind of helps me remember that it actually matters, right? For example, when I comment on an issue on WebAwesome and they get back to me and say, oh yeah, thanks for the feedback, and then they actually fix it in the next update. That, to me, it's like, wow, okay, I am actually making a difference here. Or, I release a project or I'm working with somebody else and, we get something done, and it makes things more accessible or it makes things more things available to other people, whatever it might be. Things like that kind of help remind me that actually it does matter. It's not just pointless and there is a reason to keep doing it. Even if sometimes it is kind of hard or it's frustrating, it's still worth doing because it is making a difference. And, the difference, no matter how big or small, doesn't really matter. As I've said, even with these podcast episodes, whether one person watches them or a million, I don't really care. Because if that one person listens to an episode and, they remember one thing from that, then that to me is worth making all the episodes. Even if nobody else takes anything away from any of them, if one person takes one thing away from one of them, then they're all worth it because it's making a difference. And I said, I feel like keeping that in mind is really important. Things aren't really going to be easy, and sometimes I'm going to, be set back by something, whether it be an accessibility problem or whatever it might be. It's just important to keep going. And things pretty much always work out. Even multiple times I've run into an issue and I've said, okay, I have no way to fix this. I can't do anything. I am powerless to fix this problem. But literally every time I've either actually thought of a solution or it gets fixed, I honestly can't think off the top of my head of an example where that hasn't happened, and where I've, ran into a problem and haven't been able to fix it, or whoever it is hasn't, fixed the problem itself, So it's important to remember that even though things might seem really difficult sometimes or seem impossible, that they probably aren't. And even, to somebody else from an outside perspective, it also probably doesn't seem that way either, I'm sure that I've been panicking about some things that my wife has heard me talking about, and she's been like, okay, that's actually not a big deal. It's going to be fine, whatever, and I feel like it's also important to realize that sometimes things aren't as big of an issue as they might seem like in the moment, which I feel like happens to me quite a bit. Sometimes I think something is a huge deal and it's going to be the end of the world. But actually it's totally fine and there's nothing to worry about at all, so it's just important to sort of keep keep that in your mind that it probably isn't as bad as it seems, and even if it is, it's probably going to be fine anyway. And I said that once you're kind of achieving your goal, no no matter what that is. Maybe your goal isn't making a difference. Maybe it is just making more money so you can go and do this thing or buy a house or whatever it might be. If you're contributing to that in any kind of way, then there's no real reason to stop doing what you're doing, because you're still achieving your goal. And although you might be annoyed in the moment, will you still be tomorrow or in a week? Because the answer is probably not. For most people, anyway, in most scenarios. And sometimes, look, it is maybe the wrong decision that you've made or whatever, and that is going to have a more long-term effect. And that's all right. But in general, I think it is pretty important to just kind of, stay open to keep on going, So there's been a couple things that have been really useful for me. Kind of while I've been setting up my business here, and sort of, even just with developing new websites and things, right? So essentially, any online tool is usually good. So, for example, we use Revolut Business, right? And the reason why I chose to do that is because it is fully online. And if you've dealt with banks in any sort of capacity, they want you to come into the branch and they want you to print out things and they want you to sign them and then they want you to mail them in. And that to me is honestly a lot of hassle. Yeah, could I get a taxi? Could I get the bus? Yes. But for example, my nearest AIB branch I think is an hour away, right? And that's under ideal conditions where I show up at the bus stop, the bus arrives at the exact time that I need it to. Then I think I have to get another bus. So again, the same thing again, and then the same thing on the way back, twice. So I could spend at least 2 hours getting there and back. Or I could just go with a different bank like Revolut Business, which is totally online, and save myself that trouble. I don't have to print out anything and sign it, which, as you can imagine, is a nightmare for me. I don't have to go and post anything at the post office, which again is just more difficult. I have to walk there, which is kind of stressful, to be honest. I have to come back, etc. Like, it's just a pain, So why do that? And I think that's, again, something that I've kind of learned, is to minimize those stressors, if you will, and make your life, I don't want to say as easy as possible, because it's okay if things are hard, but not if they're unnecessarily hard. And that's technically not an assistive technology, but I think it is in a way, because it assists me to do things better, easier, and I'm also way less stressed, right? And Revolut Business isn't perfect. They have their own accessibility problems, and I've been talking to them about them. Their website has a few, and that's all right. It's okay to kind of still have problems with things, but I said it's about kind of doing what works for you. In terms of actual assistive technologies, it's a little bit sort of weird, because I thought that there would be more specialized things that I would need to use or find, but I'm basically just using a lot of what I would have used if I worked at a regular company. We have a Google Workspace subscription, and so we have like Google Meet and Google Docs and all these things. I'm just using the same old screen reader, the same old like code editor, I said a lot of the problems are sort of the big companies, as strange as it may seem, whether it be LinkedIn. Oh, LinkedIn. I post on LinkedIn every day, whether it be my company page does a post or I personally do a post, every single day, pretty much, there is a LinkedIn post or a repost or something, and even LinkedIn has so many accessibility problems and so many things that it could improve. Did you know if you write an article on LinkedIn, the cover photo for that article can't have alt text? It can't. It can't have any. The photos in the article can have alt text, but the actual cover photo can't, which is ridiculous. Like, how? They already have the ability to add alt text to things, so just let me do it on the cover photo for the article. Like, why even do that? Why impose that limitation? And if it's not on purpose, well, I don't know how it happened. I don't know how they managed to make another image uploader, but this one just doesn't have the alt text button. I don't understand at all. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's weird. I just use a lot of the same things. So, if you are blind or if you have some sort of disability and you're worried about starting your own business, honestly, I don't want to say you probably don't need to be. I can't speak for your exact circumstances, or the business you want to start. But for me, it was surprisingly not different from just doing a regular job, even though I thought that it really would be. Another thing that I think is really important, just as a business owner in general, but I think especially as one who is disabled, is kind of building up a network, which is why I've been really trying to post on LinkedIn, right? Because LinkedIn is obviously more of a networking site than a social media site. And it's really important, number one, because if you have any problems, then you might be able to get them solved. For example, I did a computer science degree. So I can reach out to my, classmates if I have any actual technical problems, or I could post about it on LinkedIn. So being connected with other developers for things like that is really helpful because they might see your post, you might be able to message them, whatever it is, and even being able to connect with other people who are involved with accessibility, other people, other organizations, whatever it might be, because you'd be surprised at the conversations that you would have, or maybe even the business opportunities that might show up. Recently I was talking to a person that I connected with, I think at the start of this year, and I might actually end up working with them, which is really cool. I think we connected over something to do with game development, and now we've recently been talking about doing work in terms of accessibility together. So again, kind of networking on LinkedIn, yeah, it does prevent the usual business opportunities, but it also will kind of, I suppose, allow you to be involved in that accessibility community or involved in whatever sort of disability community, you know? So even that I think is really valuable. Being able to get on something like LinkedIn and connect with other people. So for example, if you have ADHD, connect with other people who have ADHD because you're going to be able to comment on their posts. You're going to be able to repost them. They're going to be more likely to identify with your posts, So even from that sort of perspective of being able to sort of gain more momentum by being connected with people who are able to relate to you or your, sort of posts is really valuable. And I said being able to ask them. So, for example, if I'm having a problem with an app or with a website, and I want to ask somebody else who's blind, hey, have you done this before? What do you use? Having that perspective is fantastic. Being able to ask, a group of people who have, ADHD, oh, hey, how do you kind of stay on track, and avoid getting sidetracked, when you're doing this specific task or whatever it might be. Somebody might have a really fantastic idea. Which is obviously really, really valuable, especially when you have a disability, because if you post about that on LinkedIn, but it's to an audience of people who maybe don't have ADHD, they will probably give you completely different advice as to people who do have ADHD. So being able to expand that network, especially of, other people who might have the same sort of accessibility needs, is really important. So I think kind of the main takeaway from this episode is that if you do have a disability and you want to start a business, go for it, because you're probably going to be able to accomplish whatever it is that you want. I said whether it's getting better access to something for other people with that disability or just raising awareness, whatever it might be, you're going to be able to do it. If I've been able to do it, I haven't even had my company for a year now. And I've already definitely made a significant difference in quite a few things. So that's my advice. If you have been thinking about starting a company or you want to start a company, or even if you've just said, hey, when I'm 45, I'd love to sit down and start a company, or hey, in 5 years' time, I'm going to quit my job and start a company. Why does it have to be 5 years? And look, maybe it does have to be a little bit of time. Maybe you need to make a bit more money so you can, make sure that things go well for the first few months of while you have your business, because maybe obviously it takes a while to set things up properly and to get started, and that's fine. But I encourage you to think about why not now, why not do it now, or at least as soon as you can, because I can almost guarantee you that a lot of the reasons that you have are excuses, because that's what I found was true about myself. Was there any reason that I shouldn't have just started my business? No, honestly, there wasn't. And I'm now way happier and way sort of more excited about my work and way more invested in it. And you can totally do it. There's no reason why anybody can't start a business, even if you don't have a disability. It doesn't matter, If you want to do it, then go ahead. As I said, anybody can do it. And I feel like it's starting to become a bit more of a thing. And it definitely used to be more of a thing where people would have their own businesses. But that kind of went away. And honestly, I'm happy to see it coming back, because I feel like we're just going to end up with a lot of great businesses, as opposed to, 10 really big, kind of terrible ones who do really bad things all of the time. We might end up with 1,000 smaller ones that are, at least on average, better, and at least not all of them will be doing terrible things almost all of the time, So I definitely encourage you to kind of take that leap and just give it a go, even if it's just part-time, like something, even if it's just one day a week on the weekend, investing a couple of hours, whatever it might be. Definitely try your best to make it work. So that's going to be it for this week of the Envisiontech podcast. And I really do hope that you've enjoyed this episode. I really do hope as well that you are able to take something away from it. And I really do appreciate you all for listening. Thank you again. As I mentioned, this is the Envisiontech podcast. And as always, I've been your host, Paul Geoghegan.